Are you passionate about foreign policy, national security, and the latest in domestic politics? Consider becoming a member of the DSR Network, your go-to source for in-depth analysis and insightful discussions. With the DSR Network podcasts, stay ahead of the curve on global affairs. Each episode features top experts, policymakers, and thought leaders who break down complex issues into digestible, engaging conversations. From breaking news to historical context, we cover the topics that matter most. Whether it's the intricacies of international diplomacy, the latest in national security strategies, or the dynamics of U.S. politics, the DSR Network has you covered. Members receive an ad-free listening experience, bonus content for virtually all of our shows, an invitation to join the DSR Slack community, enhanced show notes for select podcasts, and much more. Visit thedsrnetwork.com/buy and enter code GRADUATE to receive 30% off the regular membership price for the first year or first month. That's thedsrnetwork.com/buy and code GRADUATE. Thank you very much for your support.
9, 12, 10, 28, 2, 23.
This is Deep State Radio, coming to you direct from our super secret studio in the third sub-basement of the Ministry of Snark in Washington, D.C., and from other undisclosed locations across America and around the world.
Hello, and welcome to a special emergency edition of DSR, where we go to some of our best, wisest, and closest friends to help us figure out what to make of that debate last night. And we're going to do this sort of in pieces. But the first piece, I'm especially happy to be able to say, is with our friends from the Words Matter podcast. And long ago, a podcast that I was on, but she and Norm ditched me to do their own podcast. Dr. Kavita Patel. How are you today, Kavita?
I'm so excited, and I want to make sure everyone gets a plug here and now, since I'm now a founding member of your Substack, which I highly recommend. So.
Well, you're very kind. It's called Need to Know, davidrothkopf.substack.com. And we're just created it to sort of complement everything else we were doing here. Because 18 podcasts a week isn't enough.
Not enough.
It's not enough.
Not enough. We need more time with David and the team. So I don't mind. I'm a founding member and glad to put it out here and now that I'll challenge match, and for every member we get, I'll find another person or support another member.
No, that's very nice of you. So where were you last night when the debate was being held?
It may not shock you. I was with friends from Obama, but a lot of ex-Harris people, which is very interesting because these are all people who left Harris's circle, either from the Senate to the White House or left the White House. And they've also been involved in debate prep for the vice president, even though we don't know when that'll be. We don't have a vice presidential candidate for Trump yet. We can talk about that. So they've actually been heavily involved in debate prep for her. And we've been talking for weeks now about her command of the issues. And I will say that was never on better display than the post-debate cleanup, as I like to say. I think you had a good tweet about Gavin Newsom, where I know he was supposed to be the star, but it wasn't him. But I was watching with friends.
Yeah, and how did you and your friends enjoy it?
So they all, I'm a medical doctor. The minute it was I literally looked at my kind of watch, and it was about 2 minutes in when they saw Joe Biden taking, what was it, Warren? See, this is what happened.
Yeah, it's okay.
I'm sorry.
It's just two older Jewish guys, they're all the same.
Norman, you've got stable Wi-Fi.
That's my it's my only really claim to fame in life. But
quality.
Yeah.
The stage, as soon as I saw the stage placement, so 2 minutes into it, my friends turned to me and they said, so what medication should you be prescribing for this? And I actually said, truthfully, I said, I think he's sick because he had that raspy voice and we've been seeing a lot of COVID. And I said, maybe he has COVID. And then they thought, well, they can't put him on stage with COVID. And I said, well, he can't be sick. They wouldn't put him on stage. And here we come to find out we told he had a cold. Everybody just kept asking.
Yeah, that was, by the way, a brilliant stroke. Like, not to mention it. And then after he looked bad, to go, oh, no, he's sick. He's sick.
He's sick. Don't worry. He's raspy because he's sick. But those 2 minutes in, everyone turned to me and said, well, why is he not on the same medication that whatever medication he took for the State of the Union? And I said, I don't know. And what followed was just like you, because you were tweeting, an hour plus, 2 hours of, it just felt like, people sometimes ask me, like, I'm not sure if I was nauseous. What does nausea feel like? That was nausea for about 2 hours.
Thank you once again for the doctor's perspective on this. I think, let's be honest, it made a lot of people nauseous. And there were lots of reasons for it. The format was terrible. The moderators were potted plants. They never challenged anything that he said.
By the way, that comes from friends, shocking to the deep state listeners and friends who are around the Trump campaign. That was a very hard requirement the Trump campaign made, according to people.
Of course. I mean, he just lied,
That was a very hard requirement that Trump would comply with the time. I think both camps were told that when the moderator, when she would say time, that was it. But in return, they would not, I guess, push back on anything, I guess.
They shouldn't have done. They shouldn't have accepted the debate as a journalistic organization. There were also little things, and I don't want to dwell on it, but like when Trump looked at Dana Bash and Jake Tapper, he looked straight into the camera. When Biden looked at them, it looked like he was lurching to the left.
1,000%. It was terrible. It's stunning to me too that they had breaks. It wasn't frequent. It was stunning. I mean, you tell me, David. I haven't done debate prep like live at the debate, but you and I know that there are tons of people there. Ron Klain, Steve Rashad. They were all kind of there in the back. Why did nobody come and course correct? Is it because you don't want to interrupt the president with his flow? Why is that, David?
Well, I'll tell you why it is. And this is going to get us into the dicey area of this podcast. Because these are things I've assiduously avoided saying for a year. Because my whole theory of the case has been Biden's the candidate and line up, and the stakes are too high to be critical publicly of this, right? But in the course of the debate last night, and I will get to a question about this in a second, in the course of the debate, I have to admit, I went from, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything, to, oh my God, Trump is going to get away with this. We're not going to have a democracy after November. We've got to field our best team, and we've got to stop diddling around about it. And part of that best team thing is a question which we'll get to about what do you do with Biden. Part of it is we got to see more of Kamala Harris, who, as you said, was extremely good. But part of it is the team around Biden is just not cutting it right now. And he was not well prepared. They knew Trump was going to lie. They could have said, this is the way to fact check him. They could have said, if Jake Tapper doesn't bring up the fact that he's a convicted felon, then don't wait an hour to bring it up. Or that he led an insurrection. Don't wait.
January 6th. It was, what was it, an hour? It was 45 minutes in.
Yeah.
And it's somehow Donald Trump made it look like it was Nancy Pelosi's fault. I don't even understand.
Well, but one of the things that Donald Trump understood that Joe Biden's team needs to understand is that the vast majority of Americans don't watch the debate. And the vast majority of people who consume any information about the debate get it in a 15-second soundbite on Twitter. And so all Trump had to do was to look calm and offer his lie and know that that's what was going to go out. Whereas Biden's team, didn't help him put together the soundbite that would work in social media. And instead you had this image of him sort of floundering.
Yeah, that's right. That's 100% right. And I think I know how grave it is for you, and I'm going to join you in my expression. My concern about saying Biden has to go. I've seen your tweets. I saw Mehdi Hassan, who put a video together, basically making a compelling case. I have to be honest, though, David. My concern is that you and I know how Washington works. Let's play this out. He's not going to step aside. So this is a forced delegate vote in Chicago in August. I mean, tell me how this works, because that's where I'm getting tripped up.
Look, I think it's a bit of a long shot, which is not, the practicality is not the only question. There is a legitimate question that if you think democracy is at stake, then you ought to do the very best. Is this the very best? And I think that's legitimate debate to have.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you one thing. If Biden stays in, we can talk about that a little bit more, but if Biden stays in, the answer is they've got to rethink how they're going to campaign in a serious way. And they've got to, in my view, the answer is campaign by committee or campaign by team. You've got to go out there and you got to say, we're the blue team, we are the Democrats, we're the pro-democracy team. Vote for all of us up and down the ballot. We're going to save America from MAGA. The point is that if you run as the blue team, then you take pressure off of Biden. It also has the advantage of being sort of accurate, right? I mean, it's going to take many, many people to achieve the goals here, and you up the role of Harris, and you up the role of surrogates, and that's going to be your clue. If you think you can run a Biden campaign that is Biden-centric, that looks like every other presidential campaign, you're going to lose.
And David, the only comment I'll make about some intelligence from the Harris, and again, let me be clear, ex-Harris people, but they're the ones involved in the campaign and debate, et cetera. They all felt that this was just what's clear from listening to Harris team people is that they've been waiting. A couple of things. One, the people who have known her the longest have been waiting for this kind of moment. Some might call it a flash in the pan, that this was her, Joe Biden, you don't know, kind of her moment that she had 5 years ago. I disagree. I mean, she's been kind of sitting, handling crap issues, and then sitting and handling the real issues like Dobbs and so many other things kind of on her own. But unfortunately, with very small staff that got treated pretty poorly and pretty burnt out. And they're all very nervous that the Biden team is not going to let Kamala Harris be Kamala Harris, because they still do not want her to in any way overshadow. I think your point is that day is done.
Well, I hope it's done. I was still getting a little bit of that listening to Jen Psaki and some other people, on MSNBC. But the reality is, just wake up and smell the coffee. And the graceful, proper, appropriate thing to do for Joe Biden would be to say, I've had a good run. The best way to cap my legacy is to pass the torch. Here you go, Kamala. And then have Kamala Harris and Gretchen Whitmer run as an all-woman ticket, focusing on the central issue that's going to define this thing, and win big, with a new generation of leaders. And that played a critical core basis across the party. And by the way, I wrote a column now that just said this, that's going to be posting as we're sitting here at the New Republic. But I also know that's, and I say it in the column, I don't think it's likely, but I think it would be the right thing to do. But I have a different question from you. You were sitting there with the Harris people, you were sitting there with friends, but surely you were having the same experience I was, which was I was inundated with emails and texts and DMs from people, very senior Democrats, who were flipping out. I mean, maybe you weren't.
Oh, yeah, of course. Oh, yeah. No, of course. It's maybe not as, your circles are a little different than mine, but there were definitely, I think a lot of people were looking for clarity from people like yourself and occasionally myself and trying to say, this can't be real. This can't be possible. The most frequent mention was, surely this must be a joke, or surely Biden will announce that he's stepping aside tomorrow. And my response, and I think Jen Psaki on MSNBC said something, it reminded me of, you remember the 2012 Obama-Romney debate that was so bad. And it's true. Jen made the comment that Obama himself did not realize it was bad. So there is no universe where Joe Biden came off that stage and went and kind of, with Jill and hung out and went to a waffle shop and thought, wow, I bombed that one. No chance of that. So yes, I was inundated with comments, but you and I both knew that reaction was the same.
But I kept saying that, in fact, Rachel Maddow, who I think we both respect, she came out and she said, well, incumbent presidents historically do badly in first debates. And I was like, okay, wait a second. That's not the situation we're in.
It's not.
Okay. First of all, nobody has ever run against somebody who was going to end democracy. So the stakes are really different.
That's right.
Secondly, the problem wasn't that Biden had a bad debate. The problem was that Biden confirmed everybody's theories about him being too old.
That's right.
Here's one thing we know. Between now and the election, Joe Biden's not going to get younger. And
that's exactly.
he's not going to. No, they're facts. Look, I had a conversation with somebody. I don't want to say who it was, but I had a conversation with somebody. I may have mentioned to you this offline, but I had a conversation with somebody like 4 or 5 months ago who had just been to the White House. And that person went home to their spouse. And the spouse said, how was Biden? And the person said, he was pretty good. But he can't afford to lose anything between now and the election.
He has no room for error.
And,
that's exactly
and the guy's point was, he's gonna.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what it was. I had people, these senior kind of people, writing me going, I'm terrified. I'm in despair. It's all going to end. It wasn't like dump Joe Biden. It was more like we've screwed the pooch.
That's right. And part of me though, David, I'm going to ask you a question. Didn't you have this feeling as the debate unfolded when you saw the stage placement? But even maybe in the first 30 seconds, I have a gut feeling you and I both probably did the same thing where we thought this is the moment we were worried about that was going to happen in public, because you and I knew.
We talked about it. You and I have talked about it. Norm and when we have lunch, we talked about it.
I know, exactly. So we knew this was like not, I'm so shocked, David, what has happened? This is, all right, calmly, this is the event that we all knew was going to happen. We would have hoped it was not on the debate stage.
Or this early in the thing.
Early.
And the
exactly
Biden
right.
team is saying, oh no, this is just like another bad debate.
Exactly. That's the thing that's stunning. And then the decision to put Gavin Newsom as the first person for the spin room.
I mean, it's so dumb because Gavin Newsom appears and everybody's like, yes, oh my God, look at his eyes, it's
the effect we have.
Yeah, no, it's right. But look, I think when we talked about it last night, I mentioned there was a guy who was a huge Democratic donor who's actually the guy who helped us start all this and was our chairman until he passed on, Bernard Schwartz, who was a big donor. And Bernard and I had conversation right up till the day before he died, which was earlier this year, in which he said, here's what I'm worried about. I mean, and this guy's the most dyed-in-the-wool Joe Biden supporter who ever lived. And he was also 99 years old. So he's a little bit a little bit aware of what happens to old people. He said, one of these days, possibly in October, Joe Biden's going to catch cold. And he's going to get a cold, and everybody's going to flip out, and they're not going to get over it. And I was watching this thing last night going, oh, Bernard. It's happening. Yeah, it's happening now.
Not in October, right? It's happening in June. And so then that gets us to the substance, not the practicality, the substance. They've got, Kamala Harris. You mentioned Gretchen Whitmer. People brought, obviously, Gavin Newsom, Wes Moore.
Wes Moore's great. Josh Shapiro is great.
Josh Shapiro. We're talking about a deep bench. Well, not deep. I shouldn't have said that. We're talking about a stable, qualified, highly qualified bench of Democratic governors. Does it matter who Trump's vice presidential candidate is at all?
No.
Just curious.
Well, look, and he's got and first of all, he's had a process, which is literally The Apprentice. So it's
put him on TV and see who survives.
And they have all had to begin by swearing an oath of fealty to Trump, and they've all been tested by having to sign on to something idiotic, and they've all passed that. So now that you've crossed this hurdle, choose your poison. J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio, Burgum, whoever the fuck that is. Oh yeah, we need another old rich white guy on this ticket to balance it out. I mean, it really does not matter at all. What matters is whether the Democrats, and by the way, I mean, I wrote another thing about this, but I don't believe in the myth of undecided voters, right?
I agree. No, you say more about that, because I agree.
Well, because both, I mean, for the first time since 1892, and only the second time in history, the two candidates have already been president. So we know who they are, but not in 1892. There wasn't round-the-clock cable news. There wasn't social media. We know everything about these guys. If you don't have, and you're a doctor, so you may get my diagnosis wrong, but if you don't know who you want between these two people, you have a mental deficiency.
Yeah, you've got an organic disease.
You may have a neurological dysfunction. And so, the only thing you can do in this campaign is get somebody who wasn't going to turn out, and get somebody who, was softly leaning one way to lean the other way. And there are a few people like that in the kind of middle, but more, I think it's going to more be about turnout. It's going to be, how do you energize the base? And I'm just telling you, watching that last night, the main takeaway was this ain't energizing nobody. And so that's a big problem. What was it like at the end of your conversation? You're all sitting there. You probably had a drinking game in which you drank every time Trump lied. So you were all stupefied by the end of it.
If I had done that, I would definitely be comatose this morning. And by the end, so because many of them have been participating in debate prep for the vice president, were furiously trying to kind of think through. Again, these are all people who are pretty loyal. They're Obama loyalists, but I'd put them in the camp of they just want the democracy to win, just like you do, just like I do. And they were all trying to kind of think through how and when could we actually move up scheduling the vice presidential debate. I'm not kidding. That was the topic was, how quickly can we get Kamala on a stage out there in the public? She quickly.
She just got a, it's like she did the rounds of cable news last night, but it was so friggin' late. And it was after Gavin Newsom. And it's like they got to reorganize the way they think about her.
It's going to take time, though, because you and I both know a lot of the people who are probably part of that suppression.
Oh yeah, they're the The Biden loyalist. Well, look, I've taken enough of your time.
I am so happy, Norm. I mean, David, I did that on purpose now. I know. I'm going to put in another plug for your Substack, and I'm eager to find your article today to make sense out of all of the nonsensical. But we'll have to do more merged pods because this is clearly, there's nothing more important than this issue between not just now and November, but this is the most important issue.
So true. And also I like it. I like talking to you. So we'll see you again real soon. And in a minute on this podcast, everybody, we're going to hear from Norm Stummer. So stand by. All right. Talk to you soon, Kavita.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
So, as I mentioned a moment ago, we are now joined by the other half of the inimitable duo from Words Matter, the great Norm Ornstein. How are you doing today, Norm?
It's not the best of days, David, for any of us who are fearful of a Trump vicious autocracy and the destruction of the world order. But other than that, I'm okay.
Well, so how come, if you worry about such things, you think the best thing to do is to stick with the plan?
Well,
the plan that got us to where we were last night, which made everybody looking at the screen go, oh my God, it's over. I'm moving to Portugal.
Well, we better buy our property in Portugal before the prices get jacked way up. I think what people have not thought completely is how you segue out of this, if we do, to create a different with a different that will actually keep the Democratic Party together and not look like utter chaos along the way. Now, we may end up at that point, and I think if we do, it's going to be relatively soon. I suspect it'll have to be by July 4th or immediately after that holiday. But Joe Biden is not going to be forced out right now. If you watched his rally in North Carolina, it really was a completely different person. And he had a theme that I wish he had pursued, even in his closing statement. And I have to say, David, that of all the elements of the debate, starting with the disastrous opening and a lot of others along the way, I think what frustrated me the most was that last 2 minutes, because you knew that was coming. You knew how you wanted to frame it. He should have memorized an answer, and it was just as rambling and discursive as the rest of the debate. But here he, basically, if you look at the little clip of him today, it was, I know I'm old. I know I don't walk the way I did. I know I stumble more in my speech the way I did. I know I don't debate the way I did. Things I do know. I know the truth. I know right from wrong. The kinds of things that if he had made that his closing statement might have allayed a little bit of those concerns. But here's the bottom line for me. And excuse me for going on so much.
No, this is an interview with you. If you say everything and I say nothing, it's better.
I wouldn't say that. But we're going to have to let this shake out for a few days. And the question is going to be whether this is a Jerry Ford moment, and which was one gaffe, but in this case, more than an hour of gaffes that reinforce the existing stereotype of a guy. Remember, Jerry Ford said Poland is free, and everybody took it as evidence that this guy was just not up for the job. Or it's going to be a Ronald Reagan moment where Reagan in his first debate with Walter Mondale looked like he was old and losing it, and then came back in the second debate. There won't be a second debate for him to come back until it's way, 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 way too late. But if Biden does what I think he should do, and it's a big if, not just a rally in North Carolina. If I were his team, I would be calling up 60 Minutes right now and saying, you've got me for the whole hour on Sunday. I would do a town hall. I would do the interview with the New York Times that they have failed to do up to this point for good reason, but now there is a reason to do it. You want to do a whole series of things that ultimately penetrate enough to suggest that, hey, he's not that bad. And then you have to hope that the polls that we're going to get, not the ones overnight, but over the course of the next several days, don't show a significant drop-off. Then you can get back to making this election more about what Donald Trump would do and less than just a referendum on a guy who looks way too old and out of it. Now, if that doesn't work, they're going to have to come up with a better plan. But that better plan cannot be an open convention, which would be chaotic. And it would have to, I think, involve all of the putative candidates, all of the ones who would love to run if there is no Biden and run against Harris, all of them coming together with Biden, and Biden saying, for the good of the party and the country, I can't make me the issue in this campaign. It should be my record and the record of the Biden-Harris administration, and it should be the focus on the evil that Donald Trump will bring. All of us now say that we are going to make Kamala Harris our nominee and have her pick a good running mate, whether it's a Gavin or a Josh Shapiro or whoever it might be.
Keep going.
And avoid
or Gretchen Whitmer. Go on.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I would want to go with two women at this point. I think you do need a balance, and the only reason I say that is because I think that it was the misogyny that kept Hillary Clinton, not to other than the Russian involvement, James Comey and the Times, out of the White House. I want the focus to be a little bit different, but it's not difficult to come up with a really good nominee to go with Harris. If not that, and if Biden stays, then I think there's one other thing that has to be done, which I believe you will agree with, and that is you've got to make Kamala Harris the voice and focus of this campaign more now. You've got to let people be allayed in their views that if Joe Biden can't make it through a second term, we have a really good person, qualified and able and experienced enough to step in. But, everything that I'm talking about, David, is trying to find the least worst options out of a very bad position.
Did you read my article in the New Republic?
I read everything you do, of course.
Yeah, of course. Well, so my article in the New Republic, for the people who are listening who didn't read it, said this is a tough situation and the Democrats have two choices. One, they switch horses, in which case the way to do it is Kamala Harris, although I'm more of a fan of actually an all-woman ticket because the central issue in this election could well be stripping away women's freedoms. And I think it's a much tougher ticket for a guy like Trump to run against, but that's just my own point of view. And I will admit that you actually know something about politics and I don't. But the other component was that if that's not what it is, then they have to move to a kind of team strategy, not all Biden all the time, but a strategy that says we're the blue team, we're the pro-democracy team, and up and down the ballot, we're the ones that are going to stop MAGA. And Kamala Harris has got to be central in that one, too. So I agree with all you've said about the two sort of options. But I'll tell you what happened to me. And I could just imagine you were sitting there in front of the TV with a bowl of popcorn and, whatever your beverage of choice was. And you started getting emails and texts the way I started getting emails and texts. And the emails and texts I was getting from very, very senior Democrats, every single one of whom was a loyal Joe Biden supporter, was not like panic, the way it's depicted by the people who are pushing back on it. It was despair. And the reason was that these people said, I see this happening now. If this happens again, if it happens in the fall, Even if he has a lot of good days, if he has a couple of bad days right before the election, he's going to lose. And if he loses, this may be the last free and fair election in our history. And so the view of these people, and it includes, by the way, some people whose name I can use because they ultimately wrote about it, Tom Friedman, Ed Luce, their view was, no, we love Joe Biden. He's been a great president. But the way to cap off his presidency is for him to say, I'm passing the torch, because the risks are too high. This is not like Gerald Ford or Ronald Reagan, because the election wasn't whether or not democracy would survive. This election, that's what it's about. That election was not about a side that was going to try to cheat and had one insurrection under their belt. This election is that. And that election was not about, somebody stumbling in a debate, but, you sort of knew they had their career ahead of them. It's about somebody getting older who is unlikely to get stronger over time. Now, that's what the reactions were. I'm interested in your reaction to those reactions.
Well, a lot of what I said initially had been informed by your New Republic piece, but I agree with most of that. And I do think if somehow Biden gets through this, you're absolutely right that we're still taking an enormous risk, because the fact is he can very possibly allay those concerns for now, put down a revolt, and I see already a number of senior Democrats from Hakeem Jeffries on who are saying, calm down, we're not moving horses here, switching horses in midstream. But he could do that, and he could have a good couple of months. But you're absolutely right. If there's another debate in September and he performs the same way or, has some bad moments, it's deadly. And it's easy to imagine it getting to be too late. We're already fairly late in this game. I have to say, I'm baffled by how badly Biden did, given what we know about most of the encounters that people have with him in the White House and elsewhere. Given the seasoned team that prepared him, that's where I'll come back to even the closing statement. I just have to believe that he didn't do any of the things that his team told him to do. And, that puts us in a very precarious place. But I'll just repeat, there are no great options here. What we're looking at is least worst options. And we're also looking at a reality that we can't, with whatever phalanx of senior people, whether they are elected office holders and party elders or crafty, savvy journalists like Tom and Ed, force Joe Biden out. That has to happen either organically because it goes downhill from here, or because he alone, with Jill, presumably, decide that it's just too risky. I don't see that happening with the Joe Biden that I know. So we're just going to have to sit back and see what happens over the next few days. I want to reiterate one other thing, whether he stays or goes. And this has been a hobby horse of mine for so long, and I just haven't gotten anywhere with it. And that is, we need a White House summit on the dangers to democracy. Because you're right about the Dobbs decision and its aftermath. And I thought one of the most frustrating moments for me during the debate was when the abortion issue came up. And Biden first answered it reasonably well. The fact that neither of the moderators even challenged Trump when he said they want abortion, they want murders after the babies are born, which is just a blood libel falsehood. But when I expected Biden to come back and start to talk about the women who, in the states that have already acted, who are bleeding in the emergency room, restroom, or on the floor, who are dying and are told by doctors and emergency room physicians that they're going to have to bleed and get sepsis until they're almost at the point of death before they can act. And instead, he turned and talked about a woman who'd been murdered by a migrant and brought the issue back to immigration and the border. This was a really cringeworthy thing, even after the first few moments when we were all in despair. And we can't have that happen again. And I got to wonder what was going on there that had him look so pale and be so hoarse at the beginning and stumble as much as he did, which is not something that I've seen with him in encounters or what I know from others who spend a lot of time with him. But this, if it happens again, we are absolutely toast. And right now we are bread waiting to be toasted.
Yeah, we're bread that's getting toasted. If you really want to, reframe it in toast metaphors, because, one thing that happened today, which nobody's paying any attention to because of all this, is the Supreme Court made a decision that is every bit as consequential in its own realm of law as Dobbs or Citizens United or Shelby County, or any of their other terrible decisions. And essentially what they did was, by removing this thing called Chevron deference, they made it harder for the federal government to regulate companies, to protect clean air, to protect clean water, to have regular drugs. And they said, we're not going to have the experts make the decisions on that. We're going to have courts that don't know what they're talking about make the decisions on that. It was an insane power grab, and people will die. Also, corporations and fat cats will get incredibly rich. And why did this happen? Trump, the Trump court. So that's why I'm saying we're being toasted. It's happening as we speak.
You're absolutely right. If you look at that decision, John Roberts said flat out that we have the expertise to decide legislative ambiguities that agencies don't. This is a naked power grab, an illegitimate power grab by a court that would have the framers rolling in their graves. That is an outrage. But there were two other decisions today, and one in particular that I found was another part of the Trump court, and that involved a city in Oregon that had passed an ordinance that said it was illegal for the homeless to sleep outside. And they've now said, that's fine, anybody can do it. What that's going to mean is, for an awful lot of these homeless people, they have no place to go. And they are going to be put in jails and prisons. Large numbers of them have serious mental illness. We are going to fill our prisons even more with people who should not be there, who are there only because either they're destitute and can't afford a place to live, or because they have substance abuse and mental health issues. And it is cruel and unusual punishment done by a court that is absolutely cruel, along with being partisan and outrageous. And of course, let's add the dog that did not bark. Yet another day when the court did not announce its decision on presidential immunity so that they can delay the day of reckoning for Donald Trump on inciting a violent insurrection and trying to overturn an election until the election is over, banking on Trump winning and basically avoiding any consequences from what he did. And of course, if there is a Trump presidency, we will soon after that see Justice Aileen Cannon being rewarded for her outrageous behavior in delaying the trial in the slam dunk case of stealing classified documents and sharing the most sensitive intelligence with people who had no business having that intelligence. The Supreme Court is an outrage.
It certainly is. I'm glad you brought up that Grants Pass case. That's the case about the homeless. I encourage everybody to go and read the dissent by Justice Sonia Sotomayor, who has become the conscience of the court, who talks about what happens when, through no fault of your own, you don't have a place to live and you don't have a place to sleep. And so, through no fault of your own, you have to sleep outside. Is it all right to criminalize that? The majority decision said yes. But, essentially, in a country based on the Constitution, the concept that people have a right to life and liberty and, to best pursue what they can, they should have the right to do the best they can for themselves, and they don't. And as you point out, step by step, led by Gorsuch, among others, they have essentially stripped away the Sixth Amendment protections against cruel punishments. And it's pretty horrifying. There is one other thing, though, since you mentioned the immunity decision, that I haven't seen a lot of people talk about, that to me is galling, beyond all the behavior so far. And that is by announcing that Monday would be the last day of the court, and by that decision not having been taken. We now know that the justices of the Supreme Court, in their infinite wisdom, have decided to leave for the very last day this decision. Not the second to last day. They could have not taken this case 6 months ago, or they could have ruled on it a lot longer ago than that when Jack Smith said, please rule on this. They didn't. They chose the path of most delay. And they did so knowing that this would outrage many people and knowing that it would make it likely that Americans will go to the polls without judgment in whether or not this candidate led an insurrection. To me, this is, it's not just outrageous, it's brazen.
So a couple of comments to follow from that. I remember Neil Gorsuch's confirmation hearings when Senator Al Franken talked to him at length about a decision he had made on the appeals court involving a truck driver whose truck had broken down and who was faced with the prospect of freezing to death and left his vehicle. And Gorsuch basically said, you violated the terms of the trucking contract, and too bad for you. And if he had died, Gorsuch was completely cold on that front. You look at that, you look at this cruel decision, and you look at people who call themselves pro-life. Then you, getting back to what you said about Chevron, and you're absolutely right. The next pandemic, the CDC is not going to have the ability to act if it is a new pathogen that has not been explicitly considered in the law. We could have environmental disasters with the inability of agencies to act. We could have other health emergencies, hamstringing HHS. But this much I can guarantee you. If Donald Trump is president and his agencies take a reckless action that violates what they said in the Chevron decision, they'll find a way to let him get away with it. Now, we have one other decision from the other day, which is chutzpah to the extreme. And that is saying that if a public official takes an action that favors somebody else and after that gets what they call the gratuity, $13,000 in this case. It's not like a $10 tip or a $25 lunch that was given to them. That's okay. It's only if there's a quid pro quo before the action. And you could call this the Sam Alito, Clarence Thomas get out of jail free card. They are basically doing something that follows on a series of decisions jammed through by Chief Justice Roberts, who is proving to be the worst Chief Justice in the history of the United States, that basically said it's only a bribe if it is a direct quid pro quo, where it is, you do this, I will give you the money, and then giving them the money and having the action taken. And it almost has to be captured on video for it to be considered a bribe. But now we see justices doing outrageous things for hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars from people who have business before the court and getting away with it. This is a court that is both arrogant and partisan and extreme and cruel. And whether Donald Trump gets elected or not, we've got a big problem in this country with a runaway renegade Supreme Court.
Yeah, absolutely. Particularly since most bribery in gratuity, or that kind of situation does not, involve a contract, right? It's kind of wink and a nod. So essentially, what they've done is they've made it much harder to prosecute that. There's one other thing, because you wound me up, as you so well do, Norm. But as we talk about how this court has made it much, 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 much harder for the executive branch to regulate things like clean air, clean water, or drugs. And there were several decisions, by the way, in the past week that did this, not just the very big one on Chevron deference. It is worth noting that Gorsuch's mother served in Reagan's cabinet, and her agenda was to try to get rid of these things.
And, of course, ended up convicted of her own behavior.
Yeah, well, right. And so it's just outrageous. It's just outrageous. So, look, make me feel better about myself before we end, okay? Because I wrote what I've written, and I really do think this was a gut check moment, and I think it's good for Democrats to look at themselves and look at what happened last night and ask themselves, are we doing everything the right way, giving ourselves the most chance to win? Because the stakes are so high, and I do think that it is not disloyal to Joe Biden to ask, is this the best path forward? Now, we may conclude it is. And then we have to all put our shoulder against the wheel and do what we can to make it. But there is a big group of people out there saying, how dare you? And how dare you consider this? And my reaction to that, and I'd be interested in yours, is how dare we not consider it, given the stakes? How dare we not think about, well, what if Joe Biden has 3 or 4 or 3 good months, and then this kind of thing happens again closer to the election? It's really important that we think that through, because the stakes are so high, isn't it?
It is. And, to make you feel a little bit better, it's very unusual to have a presidential debate in June before the conventions. It is unprecedented. Imagine if we had followed the regular pattern and the debates took place in October, and the first one ended this way, it would be way too late. So having it happen in June, at least, is a wake-up call, however it ends up. And I can't condemn anybody or even criticize anybody for raising these issues or saying he ought to drop out. This is the time to have that discussion. And I don't know how it will end up. I suspect that Biden stays in. And I hope that this also becomes a wake-up call moment for him and his family and his staff, and what they do going forward and how they handle the rest of this campaign. And we cannot predict or be insured against another moment, no matter how prepared everybody is. But right now we're going to have to watch over the next week and see what hand ultimately we get dealt after this bad one that occurred last night, and then go forward with that. And it's a big gamble. Any way you look at it, David, the fact is there's no easy path out of this where we could snap our fingers or wave a wand and get the ideal ticket, whatever that ideal ticket might be. The best people with a very deep farm team of young talent in the Democratic Party. Any way you look at it, it's going to be difficult and tumultuous. And we're going to have to find a way after we come to this conclusion, whatever people are saying now, to all work together to put our shoulders to the wheel, because this is not a normal election. And we're going to have to find a way to turn this agenda to make it clear that even if Joe Biden is not what he was and not what he should be, but is still the candidate, the alternative is the end of freedom and the end of democracy and Project 2025. It was absolute malpractice on the part of the CNN moderators that they didn't even mention Project 2025. I think it was malpractice that they asked a question about deportation and let him get away without a single word in answering it. But having said that, the burden was on Joe Biden to mention those things. The burden was on Joe Biden when Trump gave an answer about immigration in response to the deportation issue that had nothing to do with it. It was on Joe Biden to say, he won't answer it, so I'll answer it for you. But you hope that you have moderators in a debate that will frame it around these issues and what the stakes are, and not let candidates get away with the blatant lies and the unwillingness to answer questions without pushing them to the mat on getting those answers. So I don't absolve Biden at all. And the fact is, that aside, it was a really bad performance. But, you know, it didn't have to be quite as bad as it was. And I would want to look at a different way if we end up going forward with this, whoever the nominee is, with whatever debate we have in September.
Excellent, articulate, insightful. As always, your suggestion of a summit on the threats to democracy is an exceptionally good one, and I'm glad you brought it up again, and we should bring it up again here as often as we can. You're a wise man, and I am so glad that you're not only doing your podcast here every week, but that you're in demand elsewhere in the media. I think more people need to hear you. For now, thank you very much, Norm, and I hope we can do this again soon. And thank you, everybody, for listening to this special emergency Deep State Radio Words Matter mashup about the debate. More soon. Bye-bye.